What's poppin', people? It's Dante. Today I'm going to be giving you my Ricoh GR settings for street photography. Ultimately, I believe that these are the best settings for street photography when it comes to using the Ricoh GR. And I hope that at the end of this video, you come home with a better understanding of why these settings are so great and apply it to your own process. And honestly, if you just listen to me, if you follow along the slideshow, if you get your Ricoh out right now before I start going through these slides, go into your menus, get ready to set up your Ricoh, and give this settings a try. You will have more success in your street photography. I'm here to solve this problem for you when it comes to going out there and making photographs in a seamless way. Because ultimately what this settings guide is all about is speed and simplicity and making the easiest workflow possible for you to go out there and to create photographs. Similar to this man here in this photograph, smiling, joyous, right? And in the foreground, we have this boy with the pistol out. This strong photo I made here in my hometown of Philly. You're going to be like that kid. You're going to be like that man, smiling, full of joy, whipping out the Ricoh like a pistol, like you're John Wick on the street, ready to attack, always keeping the Ricoh strapped on a wrist strap. And so ultimately, I don't obsess over gear, okay? I just want to get that out of the way, but I really do love this camera, and so I'm really eager to share these settings with you. You know, this camera always lives in my pocket, and with this new workflow and with these particular settings dialed into my camera, I'm shooting more now than I ever have in my entire life of practicing street photography for over a decade now, and this is why these camera settings matter and why I want to share it with you. And so these photographs I'm sharing with you have been made with these particular camera settings over the past few years of me exploring the streets with the Ricoh GR. And so I want you to look at these photos as a blueprint for what's possible, as a blueprint for what you can go out there and do with these camera settings. And ultimately, no camera settings are going to give you that ability to go out there and make a strong photo. But I'm going to tell you one thing straight up and off the bat with this. At least when you come home and photograph with these camera settings, I can 100% guarantee you that you're gonna at least come home with something that's aesthetically beautiful. And so that's something I really wanted to share with you off the bat, because no amount of camera settings are gonna make you a better photographer, but I believe that it will make you actually come home with a photograph that at least satisfy your soul by making something aesthetically beautiful. And so right off the bat, let's just jump right into it, going into my shooting mode. And so I use typically aperture priority, the AV mode. And so you can see in the screenshot on this slide, I have my dial set to the AV mode. And so what this allows me to do is set my aperture. And I usually set my aperture with the Ricoh GR III to f8. With the Ricoh GR IIIx, I usually set it to f9. And I use the automatic ISO settings with the maximum of 6400 and the minimum shutter speed at 1/500th of a second. And so I essentially just let the camera do the work and I just compose and shoot. And we're going to go ahead and dive into more details with all of the settings. So once again, get out the Ricoh, go through your menus with me, and let's set the camera up together. And a lot of the times I'll use AV mode, but there are situations where I'll simply use program mode and just point and shoot with the automatic function as well. So P mode, AV mode, that's all I use when it comes to shooting with the Ricoh. And so if you want to adjust your aperture, I use this dial, this wheel in the front of the camera that you can see in the screenshot. It's highlighted there in red with the arrow pointing towards it. You can adjust your aperture accordingly when you're in the AV mode. And so the focus settings that I use are very simple. I use the snap focus. I have the snap distance to 2 meters. My full press snap is off. I like to keep the snap focus or single point focus on, and I don't like to alternate between the two. Phase detection is off. And so I'm essentially shooting fast and instinctively when I use snap focus. It's essentially like zone focusing for the Ricoh, where all you need to do is set your snap focus to 2 meters and point and shoot. And if you're using the Ricoh GR III and you have your aperture set to f8, honestly, for the most part, everything's in focus when you just go around and snapshot. So it's pretty incredible. You can set your camera up this way and simply go forward and not have to worry about focusing pretty much at all, honestly. And so I keep my autofocus assist light off. This is obvious. You don't want that green or yellow light in the front of your camera making it so obvious that you're photographing. So turn that off firstly. My snap focus distance, once again, set to 2 meters. So you can see here in the screenshot, I'm going through the menus with you here in this video. We have the full press snap, that is off. The focus peaking, I keep this off. Metering and exposure. So this is a very critical part of my process. My metering mode is set to highlight weighted. And this is so important because essentially you're exposing for the highlights and crushing out the shadows. And this is what's going to give you that rich aesthetic where ultimately when I'm photographing, I'm interested in what's in the light, not what's in the shadow area. And I think this is the most simplest way to meter on the street with the Ricoh. And when you're approaching a particular scene, and you maybe want to make a micro adjustment, you can easily adjust your exposure by using the adjustment lever on the back of the camera by increasing your exposure to 0.3 to 0.7, increasing it by 1 stop, or even underexposing. And then I have my ND filter set to auto. ISO settings. So ISO settings are so simple, just set it to automatic. The point is everything we pretty much set to automatic. We want the camera to do the work and then we're just there to press the shutter. And so go into the ISO settings and open that up and find the automatic settings where you can set your ISO upper limit to 6400, your ISO auto lower limit to 400, and then the minimum shutter speed to 1/500th of a second so that you can freeze the action. And so the file format is probably one of the most important parts of my process that may be a bit strange to a typical photographer who shoots RAW or wants a high resolution file. I shoot with JPEG only, and I shoot with the small JPEG file. And so I have these small JPEGs, ultimately it's keeping my workflow as fast and simple as possible. And I believe it's the most aesthetically beautiful image that you can get straight out of the camera. And so the small JPEG is 3,360 by 2,240 pixels, which is perfect. And I believe is actually pretty good. And it's actually pretty big if you think about it. And the aspect ratio is 3:2. And so small JPEG, it's really simple. Why small JPEG? Small JPEG, I use small JPEG because when I import my photos to my iPad, I can simply import thousands of photos to my Photos app in lightning speed, sorting through all of my photographs, and I get this very simple 4 megabyte file that I can then transfer to my website blog, upload to the cloud, send back and forth, and it really does solve this headache of file storage. And when it comes down to it, you really don't even need to use external hard drives or anything because the files are so small. You can store hundreds of thousands of photos on an iPad, and this is so incredible, and I highly suggest you try the small JPEG and stick to it. And so when it comes to the image control, we're really getting into the nitty-gritty details of how I set my camera up. And so we're going to go into each setting here, but I'll briefly run through it with you. Using the high contrast black and white settings, sharpness +4, contrast +4, highlight contrast -4, clarity +4, shading +4, grain effect 3. And so we'll go through them once again. So I'm opening up the slideshow here, the different image settings that are within the image control tab. I have the high contrast black and white mode set in my camera. The high low key adjustment is set to -2. The contrast +4. The highlight contrast is set to -4. The shadow contrast is at 0. The sharpness +4. Shading +4. Clarity +4, grain effect 3. And one of the things that you can notice with these settings is pretty much I'm cranking everything to the max. And so by crushing the shadows and exposing the highlights, this is where these image control settings really shine. And so I encourage you to give it a try. Custom button layout. So this is really important actually. So if you go into your customized control settings on your LCD screen right now in your Ricoh, I am essentially setting up the adjustment lever that you can see I highlighted in that red circle with the arrow pointing to it to be the only adjustment that you're going to use when you're on the street. So that adjustment lever there is the only thing that I touch when I'm on the streets photographing. The adjustment lever button and the FN button below it. So with that adjustment lever button, I have it set so if you click that in, you can adjust the snap focus distance. That's the only thing that button does. My left D-pad is off, my top D-pad is off, the right D-pad is off, and the bottom D-pad is something you can't change, I believe. It's just set to auto white balance. And so I keep the back of my camera clean and intuitive so that you're not going to accidentally press any of these buttons, right? You're not going to fumble around with your camera settings. And so when we jump into the adjustment mode settings, you can see here setting 1 is set to snap distance only. That's all we set in the adjustment mode settings, and that's really important to highlight here. And then when we go into the FN button settings, this is the other critical aspect of my camera setup, where you can see that FN button on top of that D-pad below the adjustment lever. The FN button is set to snap. And so what that allows me to do then is by clicking the FN button, you should on the back of your camera notice that you go between snap and single point focus. If you keep the rest of the adjustments and the FN button settings off, that FN button is going to become your best friend, because ultimately what I do is if I want to get hyper close to a subject and go from snap focus to single point autofocus, I click the FN button and it goes back and forth between snap focus and single point focus. And so once again, the adjustment lever dial is used to adjust the snap focus distance. The FN button is used to go back and forth between snap and single point autofocus. And the only other thing that adjustment lever does for me is either increase the exposure or underexpose. So I go right to overexpose, left to underexpose, and it's a very simple adjustment lever. And so I believe that these settings are the best because it provides you with the fastest reaction time possible, where you want to always just have the Ricoh on your wrist strap ready to go and press the shutter. You don't have to set your camera up when you take it out and you're ready to shoot. It's just always set up for you. All you really need to do at this point is just click a button, right? There's no distractions. I'm giving you the best image control settings that will allow you to photograph these beautiful, strong contrast images with a timeless street photography aesthetic. You can go out there with these settings that are simple and streamlined, where you can shoot, make your selections quickly with the small JPEGs, and then publish your photographs without having to process any of the photographs. And this is critical, where I have the LCD touch operation on. So on the back of the camera, you can go through the LCD settings and, just swipe through with your finger, which is cool. The touch autofocus, however, I keep off. This is something that I believe is distracting and I don't necessarily recommend using. And then we get into the shooting info display. So in the shooting info display, we have a few different adjustments that I make to keep the back of your LCD screen as minimal and simple as possible. And so when you go through the shooting info display, what you have to do to create that check mark is click in that adjustment lever button. Click in the button that we set to snap focus distance. And so by clicking in that adjustment lever, go ahead and select the exact checkboxes I have here on the LCD display and the grid guide. Those are the only adjustments that you want to make here in the shooting info display to create the most minimalist, aesthetically beautiful LCD screen as possible that doesn't become distracting. The playback info display, keep it all off. You don't need any of this stuff. And so with the grid style, I keep the 4x4 grid, and this is actually really critical because when you're in snap focus mode, it'll at least give you this grid where you can pinpoint and see exactly where the center of the LCD screen is. And so this is what my LCD screen looks like, and this is what your LCD screen should look like, where you have the shutter speed, the aperture, the ISO. On the left-hand side, you have the snap focus distance, and you can see that scale there to see what will be in focus. And so from pretty much anywhere from 1 meter to infinity is going to be in focus when you're using the Ricoh GR III at f8 at snap focus 2 meters. And so this is pretty simple, guys. And if you hit that display button on the bottom right of the D-pad, it will turn the LCD screen off and on. So just be mindful of that. And so that display button, if you click it accidentally and you wonder, why is it not showing my LCD screen? It's because it's set to turn it on and off. And that is a very simple way to save battery and to just turn it off if you want to. And so sound effects, keep these off. Only keep the shutter sound only. Very simple. You don't want the camera making lots of noise on the streets. The volume, set that to 0. Once again, you don't want any distractions on the street. And honestly, this is pretty much it, right? We went through all of my particular settings. I really wanted to make this video just to get it out there. I know I made a video about my Ricoh before, but this one I just wanted to share the exact settings that I use so that you can reference this video in the future, or reference it right now, or send it to a friend if you find this workflow and this camera settings to help you. Yeah, share it with one other person, help other people set their Ricoh up as well. And if this workflow works for you, which it should, I'm glad, because this workflow and these camera settings and the way that I'm shooting these days is just providing my life with so much joy, and I'm finding so much more success with my street photography. And so that's my goal with this video, is to give you the settings that have been helping me achieve strong photographs on the street. And so, yeah, if you want to see my full workflow, I'll be sharing my iPad workflow next. That's going to be something I'll put out there on the YouTube channel and on my blog to share with you once I come home from making photographs, what I do behind the scenes, you know, and how I go through my photos, how I make selections, back them up, etc. And so just realize that you want to keep the setup and the settings particularly as simple as possible so that you can hit the street and click a damn button. I mean, like, that's all this is. That's why the Ricoh, I believe, it's the closest thing to not having a camera. When you set the Ricoh up this way, all of the over complications, like, you see how many different menus there are in this Ricoh? Like, I think that turns people off because there's so many different like settings you have to put in. There's all these new buttons. It's not like a traditional, you know, film camera where you have the ISO, aperture and stuff. Like, everything's kind of set up in this weird way. But I 100% guarantee you, if you strip it down to these particular settings and you go out there and you try to photograph this way, it'll make your life so much easier. And the easier you make your life, the better your photographs will get. And so if you want to go ahead and check out more about the Ricoh, I did make the Ultimate Ricoh GR Street Photography Guide, breaking down my settings once again, but I also go into the techniques and some of my workflow. And so this video that you see on my YouTube channel or on my blog that you can visit at dantesisofo.com can also be a resource that can hopefully help you and guide you on how exactly I use the Ricoh and approach the streets with this camera. And so thank you for watching today's video. I will see you in the next one. Peace.